The knock came 3 times, fast and hard, at 2 in the morning. I was awake before my mind caught up with my body. My hand found the edge of the table, my legs swung off the cot, and I was standing in the dark of my small metal house before I even remembered where I was. Outpost Calder Ridge, edge of human territory, the kind of place where nobody knocks on your door unless something has gone very wrong. I opened the door with the chain still on, and the cold air of the moon's thin night bit into my face. Steam rose from the ground vents outside. And standing there, wrapped in a gray traveling cloak that did nothing to hide her long neck and her 4 narrow fingers, was a Vesson woman. I had not seen one of her kind up close in 9 years. Not since the war ended. Not since Kestrel Station. Her eyes were large and pale gold, the kind that could see in near darkness, and right now they were fixed on me with a desperation that made my chest go tight. Her skin had the soft blue-gray color of her people, and there were fine lines around her mouth that told me she had been crying, though Vesson did not cry the way we did. Their sorrow showed in the way their skin dimmed, like a light losing power. Hers was very dim. "Daniel Cole," she said. Her voice had that layered sound, like 2 tones speaking at once, one just under the other. "You are Daniel Cole." I did not answer right away. On a frontier outpost, admitting your own name to a stranger in the middle of the night was not something you did carelessly. But something about the way she said it, like she had practiced the words 100 times on the way here, stopped me from lying. "Who's asking?" "My name is Elira Kesson." She pressed one hand flat against the doorframe, as if she needed it to keep standing. "I am sorry. I know this hour is wrong. I know I should not be here, but I did not have a choice." I unhooked the chain. I don't know why. Every instinct I had built up over years of frontier living told me to keep that door shut, to call the outpost watch, to not let a stranger from a species we had only recently stopped fighting stand in my home in the dead of night. But there was something in her voice that cut straight past all of that. "Come in before the wind takes the door off its hinges," I said. She stepped inside, and I saw how thin she was under that cloak, how her hands shook slightly even when she folded them together. I pulled a chair out for her, and she sat like her legs had been waiting for permission to give out. "Water?" I asked. "Or whatever your people drink that isn't going to make you sick." "Water is fine." A small sound came from her that might have been a laugh, if laughs could be made of grief. "Thank you." I filled a cup and set it down, then sat across from her, my own hands wrapped around a mug of something bitter and black that I needed more than she needed her water. "You said you didn't have a choice," I said. "Choice about what?" Elira Kesson looked at me for a long moment. Her golden eyes moved over my face like she was searching for something specific, a scar, a mark, some proof that I was the man she thought I was. "My daughter is dying," she said. The words landed flat and simple, the way the worst news always does. No dressing it up, no softening it. "I'm sorry," I said, because that was the only honest thing to say, but I don't understand what that has to do with me. "Her name is Mira. She is 11 years old, by your counting. She has a condition our healers call the fading breath. It attacks the lungs first, then the heart. There is no cure. Not one that our medicine has found, and not one that yours has offered either, though we have asked." I felt the weight of that sentence settle into the room. An 11-year-old, dying, and this woman had traveled who knew how far, alone, at night, to knock on the door of a stranger on a human outpost. "I still don't see where I fit into this," I said, though something cold was already crawling up the back of my neck. Some part of me had already guessed, and did not want to be right. Elira reached into the folds of her cloak and pulled out a small data slate, cracked at one corner, clearly old and clearly precious. She turned it toward me. On the screen was a grainy photograph, the kind taken by an old security camera, time-stamped 9 years back. It showed the inside of a station corridor, smoke curling along the ceiling, red emergency lights painting everything in a dull glow. And in the middle of that photograph was a man in a scorched uniform, carrying a Vesson man over his shoulder, moving fast toward an escape pod. I recognized the corridor before I recognized myself. Kestrel Station, the night the reactor core cracked. The night I had spent 4 hours going back into a dying station, again and again, pulling out anyone I could find, human or Vesson, because in that moment nobody cared what species was screaming for help behind a jammed door. "That's me," I said quietly. "That is you," Illyra agreed. "The man you carried out that night was named Rurik Kessin. He was an engineer on that station. He was badly burned. The station's medical bay had already collapsed, so your ship carried him to the nearest human vessel, and your doctors treated him even though the war was still being fought, even though by every rule of that war he was your enemy." I remembered him now, vaguely, the weight of him across my shoulders, the way his breathing had gone shallow and wet before I got him onto the pod. I had never learned if he survived. There had been no time. Within a week I was reassigned, and within a year, the war had swallowed every name and face I had pulled from that wreckage, folding them into a blur of smoke and noise that I had spent years trying not to remember too clearly. "He survived," I said. It wasn't quite a question. "He survived," Illyra said. "He lived 9 more years. He was my husband. He was Mira's father." Was. I caught the word, and I understood, without her needing to explain further, that Rurik Kessin was no longer alive. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said, and I meant it more than the words could carry. Illyra's dim skin flickered, just slightly, like a candle catching a breath of air. "He talked about you every year on the day of the fire. He never learned your name in that moment, only that a human soldier had gone back into a burning station 4 times to pull out strangers who were, by every law, supposed to be his enemy. He told Mira that story since she was old enough to understand it. He called you the man who did not ask which side you were on before deciding to save a life." My throat felt tight. I had never thought of that night as anything more than doing the job in front of me. I had never imagined it had grown into a story told to a child, year after year, until it became something like a legend inside their small family. "How did you find me?" I asked. "After Rurik died, I searched the old station records. It took months. Many names had been sealed under wartime security. But I found your service record eventually, and I found where you settled after the war." She looked down at the data slate still glowing faintly in her hands. "I did not come here for myself, Daniel Cole. I came because 2 weeks ago, the healers told us that Mira has very little time left. Days, perhaps a few weeks if she is fortunate. And when I sat beside her and asked what I could still give her, what I could still do for her in the time we have left, she did not ask for a toy, or a trip to see the stars, or any of the small things a child might want." Illyra's pale gold eyes finally broke from mine and dropped to her folded hands. "She asked to meet you," she said, "the man from her father's story. She wants to see, before she dies, that the man who did not ask which side you were on is real." The room went very quiet. Outside, the wind pushed against the thin walls of the house, and somewhere far off a transport engine rumbled across the dark sky. I sat there with my mug going cold in my hands, staring at a stranger who had just handed me a weight I did not know how to hold. "I'm not the man from a story," I said finally, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. "I'm just someone who was trained to run toward fires instead of away from them. That's all that was." "That is not all that was," Illyra said, and for the first time, there was something firm underneath the exhaustion in her voice. "You saved a man from your enemy's side while your own people were dying around you. You did not do that because you were trained to. You did that because it was who you are. That is the story my daughter has carried inside her for years, and now she is running out of time to know if it is true." I set the mug down on the table, my hand steadier than I expected, though my chest felt like it had been cracked open. "Where is she?" I asked. "Where is Mira now?" "On our homeworld," Illyra said. "Threnna, 3 days from here by the fastest route we can take." 3 days. For a child with days, maybe weeks left. I did the math without wanting to, and I did not like the answer it gave me. "There's a problem," I said slowly. "Human travel into Vessan territory isn't exactly welcomed right now. The peace between our people is barely 5 years old. I don't have clearance to just fly into your homeworld's orbit. Neither do you, bringing a human back with you, not without triggering every alarm your security forces have." "I know," Illyra said. "I have already thought of this every hour since I left Threnna. There is no clean way to do this, no safe way. There will be people on my world who see a human stepping off a ship and think only of the war, not of the truth behind it. There will be questions asked that I do not have good answers for. It will not be easy, and it may not even be safe." She looked at me then, steady despite everything trembling underneath her words, and I understood that she had already accepted every risk in that sentence long before she ever knocked on my door. "I am not asking you because it is safe," she said. "I am asking you because my daughter has one wish left in this world, and it is you. I do not know if you can say yes to something like this. I would understand if you could not, but I had to ask. I owed her that much." I looked past her, out through the small frost-covered window of my house, toward the dark curve of the horizon, where the sky was just beginning to show the faintest gray of morning. I thought about a burning corridor 9 years old. I thought about a man I had carried over my shoulder and never learned the name of until tonight. I thought about a girl I had never met, lying somewhere far across the stars, spending what little strength she had left, waiting to find out if a story her father told her was true. "When do we leave?" I said, and it was not a question. For the first time since she had stepped through my door, Illyra Kessen's dim skin brightened, just slightly, just enough to show something that might have been hope. "Now," she said, "if you are willing. We do not have days to spare deciding." I was already reaching for my coat. We left before the sun cleared the ridgeline, in a small transport ship Illyra had rented under a false registry, a battered hauler called the Long Path that looked like it had survived more trouble than it should have. I packed light. A change of clothes, my old service jacket, and nothing that looked like a weapon, because the last thing I wanted was to give anyone a reason to stop us before we even left the ground. Illyra flew the ship herself, her thin fingers moving over controls built for a different body than mine, and I sat in the co-pilot seat feeling like I had stepped backward into a war I thought I had left behind. "You should know something before we go further," she said, once we had cleared the outpost's traffic lanes and the stars opened up wide and dark in front of us. "My people did not simply lose family in that war. We lost cities. We lost entire settlements to human strikes in the last 2 years of the fighting. There are many on Threnna who do not care what one soldier did in one burning corridor. To them, every human wears the same face. And you're bringing one home anyway," I said. "I am bringing home the man who saved my husband," she said. "There is a difference, but I am not certain everyone will see it that way." I looked out at the stars sliding past the viewport and thought about how strange it was that after 9 years of trying to forget the war, I was flying straight back into the heart of what it had cost the other side. I had grown used to thinking of the peace as something signed on paper, something that lived in treaties and border checkpoints. I had not thought much about what it looked like from the other side of that paper, in the eyes of people who had buried children under human fire. "How bad could it get," I asked, "if someone recognizes what I am before we reach your daughter?" Illyra was quiet for a moment. "There are checkpoints along the approach to Threnna that scan every ship for biological signatures. Human genetic markers will trigger an alert the moment we are close enough to be read. I have a way around the first 2 checkpoints, old codes from my husband's engineering clearance that have not yet been revoked. But there is a 3rd checkpoint, closer to the homeworld, that I cannot bypass. We will need another plan for that one." "What kind of plan?" "I do not know yet," she admitted. "I was hoping the answer would come to me before we arrived." That was not exactly comforting, but I had flown into worse situations with less than that, so I let it go and settled back into my seat, watching the black of open space roll past. The first day was quiet in a way that made my skin itch. Illyra kept the ship on a long, curving route, meant to avoid the busiest lanes, and most of the hours passed in silence, broken only by the soft hum of the engines and the occasional chime of a system checking itself. I used the time to ask questions, gently, about Mira, because I realized I knew almost nothing about the girl I was traveling across the stars to meet. "She likes to draw," Illyra told me, her voice softening for the first time since we had left. "Star charts, mostly. She has filled 3 data slates with maps of systems she has never visited, imagining what the planets might look like from orbit. When she was younger, she used to ask her father to tell her which of the stars on her maps were near the place he was rescued. He never gave her the true coordinates. He said some stories are better left as legends, without a map pointing to exactly where they happened. I found myself smiling, despite everything, at the thought of a child filling data slates with imaginary star charts. "She sounds like a scientist in training," I said. "She wanted to build ships, once," Illyra said. "Before she got sick. She used to say she would build the fastest ship in the galaxy, faster than anything human or Vesson had ever made, so that no rescue would ever again take 4 hours the way her father's did. She was very serious about it." That last detail hit me harder than I expected. A child, born from a man I had carried out of fire, had grown up dreaming of building the very thing that might have saved her father sooner. I sat with that thought for a long while, watching the stars, saying nothing. On the second day, trouble found us early. We were 3 hours from the first checkpoint when the Long Path's proximity sensors lit up with a warning chime that made Illyra's whole body go rigid. She pulled up the display, and I saw a shape on the scanner, small and fast, closing on our position from behind. "Patrol Scout," she said. "Vesson military class, not a checkpoint ship. This is not on our route. Can you outrun it?" "Not without burning fuel we do not have to spare." Her fingers moved fast over the console, cutting our engine output, angling the ship's profile to look smaller on their scanners. "Get into the aft storage compartment, now." I did not argue. I moved fast through the narrow corridor of the ship and folded myself into a cramped storage space meant for cargo, not people, pulling the panel shut behind me, just as I heard the comm crackle to life up front. Through the thin wall I could hear the exchange, muffled but clear enough to follow. A voice, clipped and suspicious, demanding Illyra's registry, her point of origin, her reason for traveling this route. Illyra answered smoothly, her voice steady in a way that told me she had rehearsed lies like this before, claiming she was returning from a supply run to the outer settlements, that her ship had drifted off the standard lane due to a navigation fault she had already flagged for repair. There was a long pause, long enough that I felt my pulse climb in the dark, cramped space, listening to my own breathing sound far too loud. Then the voice on the comm said something short, and the patrol scout's engine sound grew fainter and fainter until it was gone. I did not come out of the storage compartment until Illyra called for me, and when I did, her hands were shaking against the console. "That was close," she said. "You handled it well." "I have had practice," she said, and there was something bitter under the words that I did not push her to explain. We reached the first checkpoint an hour later, and her husband's old clearance codes worked exactly as she had hoped, letting us slip through the scan without triggering the alert she had feared. The second checkpoint came 6 hours after that, and again the codes held, though I watched Illyra's shoulders stay tense long after we had cleared it, as if she did not quite believe our luck would continue. It was somewhere in the long stretch of quiet after the second checkpoint that she finally told me more about what waited for us on Threnna. "My people are not a single voice," she said. "Some believe the peace with humans was necessary and right. Others believe it was a surrender we should never have accepted. My own brother sits on the council that oversees security for the capital region where Mira is being cared for. He does not know I am bringing you. If he learns before we arrive, he may try to stop us." "Your own brother?" "He lost his mate in the war," Illyra said quietly. "He has not forgiven humans, and he has made it clear he does not intend to." If he sees you standing in that hospital, he may see only a soldier from the war that took everything from him. He may not stop to ask what story brought you there. I felt the weight of that settle over me, heavier than the patrol scout had been, heavier than any checkpoint scan. It was one thing to risk myself against strangers and border guards. It was another thing entirely to walk into a room where the person standing between me and a dying child's last wish might be family that hated everything I represented. "Then we don't tell him," I said. "We get to Mira quietly, and we deal with your brother only if we have to." "That is my hope as well," Illyra said, "but hope has not been a reliable guide these last few weeks." The third checkpoint came on the final day of our journey, closer to Threnna than the other two, guarding the last approach into the homeworld's orbital lanes. This was the one Illyra had admitted she had no clean way around, and as the long path slowed on approach, I could see why. Ahead of us, hanging in the dark like a slow constellation, was a ring of orbital defense platforms, each one bristling with sensor arrays bright enough to catch anything that tried to slip past unseen. "There is no code that gets us through this one," Illyra said. "Every ship is boarded and inspected here. It is the last line before the homeworld itself." "Then we don't hide," I said, an idea forming faster than I expected, born from years of learning that sometimes the boldest choice was safer than the clever one. "We stop hiding me. We tell them exactly who I am and why I'm here, before they find out on their own and decide we were trying to sneak past them." Illyra turned to look at me, her golden eyes wide with something between fear and disbelief. "You want to walk into a Vessin checkpoint and announce that you are human." "I want to walk in with the truth instead of a lie. They can catch us in," I said. "If they scan the ship and find me hidden, we look like a threat. If we tell them ourselves, we look like exactly what we are, a mother trying to bring comfort to a dying child. That story is harder to shoot down than a lie." She was quiet for a long moment, her hands resting on the controls, the weight of the decision settling visibly across her tired shoulders. Then she nodded, once, sharp and final. "If this fails," she said, "it will fail badly." "It's already failing badly if we get caught hiding," I said. "Let's give the truth a chance first." She opened the comm channel, and her voice, when it came, was steadier than I had any right to expect from someone about to gamble everything on the honesty of strangers. "This is the transport long path, requesting priority clearance to Threnna Capital Medical District. I am traveling with a human civilian. I ask that you hear our reason before you act." The silence that followed stretched long enough that I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, and somewhere behind that silence, 3 days and a lifetime away, a little girl was still waiting to find out if the story her father told her every year around the fire's anniversary was true. The voice that answered was not what I expected. I had braced myself for anger, for suspicion, for the clipped hostility of the patrol scout we had slipped past earlier. Instead, the officer on the other end of the comm sounded tired, careful, the voice of someone who had spent years handling situations too complicated for simple rules. "Long path. This is checkpoint control. Hold your position and prepare to be boarded. Do not attempt evasive maneuvers. We will hear your reason." Illyra let out a breath I did not realize she had been holding, and guided the ship into a slow, careful drift. Engines idle. Everything about our approach designed to look as harmless as possible. The boarding party arrived 20 minutes later. 4 Vessin security officers in dark gray uniforms, moving through the airlock with the kind of practiced caution that told me they had done this 1,000 times and trusted none of it. Their leader was an older Vessin woman with silver markings along her jaw, her eyes moving over me the moment she stepped through the airlock, taking in every detail of my human face like she was cataloging a threat. "Identify yourself," she said, and her translator device rendered the words flat and mechanical, stripping away whatever tone had been underneath. "Daniel Cole," I said, "former human search and rescue technician. I'm not armed, and I'm not here on any military or government business. I'm here because a mother asked me to see her dying daughter." The officer's eyes flicked to Illyra. "Explain." Illyra explained. She told them about Kestrel Station, about the fire 9 years ago, about a man who had gone back into a burning corridor 4 times to carry out anyone he could find, human and Vessin alike. She told them about Rurik, about his death, about Mira and her fading breath, and the one wish she had asked for before her time ran out. She did not soften any of it, and she did not rush through it either, and I stood there in the tight space of the airlock corridor and let a stranger tell the story of the worst night of my life to a room full of armed officers who had every reason not to believe her. When she finished, the silver-marked officer studied me for a long moment. "You have proof of this rescue," she said. It was not quite a question. Illyra held out the old data slate, the cracked one, with the grainy security photograph still glowing faintly on its screen. The officer took it, studied the image, then looked back at me, comparing the face in the photograph to the one standing in front of her. "Wait here," she said, and stepped away to speak quietly with the other 3 officers, their voices too low for the translator on my side to catch. I stood in that narrow corridor for what felt like an hour but was probably closer to 10 minutes, my pulse loud in my own ears, Illyra standing beside me with her hands folded tight in front of her, both of us waiting on the judgment of strangers. Finally the officer turned back. "This checkpoint does not have the authority to approve civilian medical visits for foreign nationals," she said. "That decision falls to the Capital District Council. I am required to escort you both directly to council chambers upon arrival, where this matter will be reviewed before you are permitted to proceed to the medical district." My stomach dropped. Council chambers meant officials, meant paperwork, meant delay, and delay was the one thing Illyra had told me we could not afford. "How long will that review take?" I asked. "That depends on the council," the officer said. "It could be resolved quickly. It could take days." Illyra's dim skin flickered with something close to panic, and I understood without her saying a word that days was a length of time her daughter did not have to spare. "Is there any way to expedite this?" I asked. "Her daughter has very little time left. Every hour we lose in a chamber is an hour she doesn't get to spend with the one thing she asked for before she dies." The officer's expression did not change, but something in her eyes softened, just slightly, the way stone sometimes softens under enough patient water. "I cannot override procedure," she said, "but I can log this as an urgent medical circumstance, which moves your case to the front of the council's queue rather than the back. That is the most I am able to offer." "Thank you," Illyra said quietly. "That is more than I expected." We were escorted the rest of the way to Threnna under guard, though not unkindly, the 4 officers keeping their distance but never treating me as a prisoner, only as a variable they did not yet know how to classify. As the ship descended through the atmosphere, I got my first real look at the Vessin homeworld, wide oceans the color of deep amber, cities built along coastlines in structures that curved and layered like something grown rather than built, and above it all, a sky streaked pale violet by the particular composition of their atmosphere. It was beautiful, and I found myself thinking, with a strange ache, that this was a world humans had spent years trying to burn. The council chamber was smaller than I expected, a circular room with high windows and a ring of seats occupied by perhaps a dozen Vessin officials, most of them older, all of them watching me, with expressions ranging from cautious curiosity to open hostility. Illyra stood beside me at the center of the room and told her story again, this time to an audience with the power to send us away. Partway through her account, one of the council members, a broad-shouldered man with deep lines etched across his face, rose from his seat. "I recognize this account," he said, his translated voice heavy with something that sounded like old grief, carried a long time. "My cousin served on Kestrel Station during that fire. She spoke of a human who pulled her from a collapsed corridor when her own rescue team had already given her up as lost. I did not know his name until today." A murmur moved through the chamber, and I felt the tension in the room shift, just slightly, like a held breath finally beginning to release. Not everyone shifted with it. A woman near the back of the chamber rose as well, and I saw immediately, from the sharp intensity in her golden eyes and the resemblance in the line of her jaw, that this was Alira's brother's colleague, or perhaps something closer. She did not identify herself as family, but the way Alira's whole body went still at the sight of her told me this was someone dangerous to our cause. "One rescued life does not erase a war," the woman said. "I lost my sister to a human strike on a supply convoy that had no military value. I have heard stories of good humans before. I have also buried the proof that not every human story ends the same way." The chamber went quiet, and I felt every eye turn toward me, waiting to see how I would answer something that had no clean answer. "You're right," I said, and I meant it. "I can't undo what happened to your sister. I can't speak for every human who fought in that war, because some of them did terrible things, and I won't stand here and pretend otherwise. All I can tell you is what I did on one night, in one corridor, and why I'm standing in this room now. A little girl is dying, and the only thing she asks for before that happens is to know that a story her father told her is true. I'm not here to settle a war. I'm here because I think that's worth doing, whatever else is still broken between our people." The woman studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable, and then sat back down without another word. It was not agreement, it was not forgiveness, but it was silence, and in that room, silence was enough to let the council continue. They deliberated for nearly an hour while Alira and I waited outside the chamber doors, her hands twisting together, mine pressed flat against my knees to keep them from shaking. When the doors finally opened, the silver-marked officer who had first boarded our ship stepped out to deliver the ruling. "The council has granted a temporary medical visitation permit," she said. "You are authorized to travel to the capital medical district under escort for a period not to exceed 48 hours. 48 hours. It was not forever. It was not even close to enough time to undo years of war between two species. But it was enough time to walk into a hospital room and let a dying child see, with her own eyes, that the man from her father's story was real." The medical district was quieter than I expected, a wide complex of pale curved buildings set among gardens of amber-colored plants that swayed gently in a breeze I could not feel through the transport's windows. Alira led me through corridors that smelled faintly of something clean and unfamiliar, past rooms where Vesson patients rested under soft violet light, until we reached a door near the end of a long hallway, guarded not by security but by a single nurse who nodded at Alira with quiet recognition. "She has been asking about you every hour," the nurse said, "since you left." Alira's hand found mine, just for a moment, a brief and startling contact that told me more clearly than any words how much courage this had taken her. 3 days of lies, and checkpoints, and council chambers, all leading to this door. "Are you ready?" she asked me. I thought about the burning corridor 9 years ago, about a man I had carried on my shoulder without ever learning his name, about the years since then that I had spent trying not to think too hard about that night. I thought about a girl who had grown up drawing star charts and dreaming of building faster ships, who had spent her one dying wish not on herself but on the hope that a story was true. "Yes," I said. Alira opened the door. The room inside was small and bright, filled with the soft hum of medical equipment, and the pale violet light of Threna's particular sun filtering through a wide window. A bed sat near the center, and in it, propped up against a stack of pillows, was a young Vesson girl, thin in a way that made my chest ache, her skin dimmer than her mother's, but still holding a faint glow that seemed to brighten the moment she saw us. Her golden eyes, so much like her mother's, went wide. "Mama?" Her voice was thin, breathy, each word costing her visible effort. Is he?" "Mira," Alira said softly, crossing to the bed and taking her daughter's small hand in both of hers. "This is Daniel Cole." The girl stared at me for a long, silent moment, her small chest rising and falling with the careful, measured breaths of someone whose lungs had learned to work harder than they should have to. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, fragile and enormous all at once. "You're real," she whispered. "Papa he always said you were real, but I thought maybe he made you bigger than you were, the way stories do." I pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, so that I was level with her instead of looming over her small frame, and I found that my throat had gone tight in a way I had not expected. "I'm real," I said, "though I think your papa probably did make me sound a little bigger than I was. That's usually how stories work." Mira laughed, a small, breathless sound that turned into a cough before it finished, and Alira leaned forward with quick concern until the girl waved her off with a weak hand. "I'm fine, Mama," she said. I want to talk to him, please." Alira hesitated, then nodded, stepping back to give us space, though I noticed she did not go far, staying close enough to watch every breath her daughter took. Mira turned her golden eyes back to me, bright despite the tiredness underneath them, and I understood, sitting there in that small bright room 3 days and a lifetime from where I had started, that this was the moment everything had been building toward, and that whatever came next, I owed this child every ounce of honesty I had left in me. "Tell me what really happened," she said, "not the story Papa told, what really happened, that night, in the fire." I looked at her for a long moment, this small girl with her mother's eyes, and I imagined her father's stubbornness, and I decided she deserved the truth more than she deserved comfort. "The real story starts with an alarm," I said. "Not a dramatic one, just a warning light on my console, telling me the station's reactor containment had failed. By the time I got my suit on and reached the first corridor, the whole lower deck was already filling with smoke, and half the lights were out." Mira's eyes stayed fixed on me, unblinking, drinking in every word. "I wasn't thinking about who was Vesson and who was human," I said. "I want you to understand that, because I know that's the part of the story your papa liked best, but it wasn't some grand decision I made standing in a doorway. There wasn't time for grand decisions. There was just a corridor full of smoke, and people trapped behind a jammed door, and my job was to get them out. That's all it was, in the moment, just the job." "But you went back," Mira said. 4 times. Papa said 4 times. 4 times, I agreed. "Because after the first trip, I knew there were more people trapped further in, and the fire suppression system had failed, and every minute I waited made it worse. So I went back. The second time was harder than the first, because the smoke was thicker and I could barely see the markings on the walls to find my way. The third time, part of the ceiling had come down, and I had to climb over it in the dark, not knowing if it would hold my weight. And the fourth time was Papa," Mira said softly. "The fourth time was your papa," I said. "He was pinned under part of a collapsed support beam, and his leg was badly hurt, and the smoke was so thick by then that I could barely breathe through my own filter. I didn't know he was Vesson until I got close enough to see him clearly, and by then it didn't matter. He was a person trapped in a fire, and I was the person who could get him out, and that was the whole of it." Mira's breath hitched, not from her illness this time but from something else, something that looked like she was holding an enormous feeling very carefully so it would not spill over too fast. "He said you talked to him," she said. "The whole way out. He said you never stopped talking, even though he couldn't understand a word of it, because your translator had been damaged in the fire." I laughed, surprised, the memory rising up clearer than it had in years. "That's true." I don't even remember what I said. I think I was mostly just talking to keep myself calm, telling him we were almost to the pod, telling him to keep breathing, things like that. I didn't think he understood a word of it. "He said it didn't matter that he understood the words," Mira said. "He said he understood the sound of it. He said it sounded like someone who meant to keep his promise." I sat with that for a moment, the weight of it settling somewhere deep in my chest, a memory I had carried for 9 years without ever knowing it had grown into something this large in someone else's life. "I got him to the escape pod," I said, "and I stayed with him until the medical team took over, and then I went back for the next person, and the next, until there was nobody left to find. That's the whole story. It's not as big as the one your papa told you, but it's the true one." Mira was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with an intensity that made me feel like she was memorizing it, storing it away somewhere she could return to later. "I think it's bigger," she said finally. "Not because of the fire. Because you didn't have to keep going back. You could have stopped after the first trip and no one would have blamed you. But you didn't stop. That's the part Papa always said mattered most. Not that you were brave once, that you kept choosing to be brave, over and over, even when it would have been easier not to." I did not have a good answer for that, so I did not try to give one. I simply sat there, letting a dying child's words settle over me in a way that felt heavier and more important than any medal or commendation I had ever received for that night. The door opened behind us, and I turned to see a Vesson man stride into the room, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the dark formal robes of someone with authority, his golden eyes sharp with an anger that had clearly been building since long before he reached the doorway. I recognized the shape of his jaw immediately, the same line I had seen on Alira's face, and I understood before he said a word that this was her brother, Alira. His voice was low, controlled, but every word carried a current of fury underneath it. "I received word that a human was granted a medical permit into this district. I did not believe it until I saw the transport records myself." Alira stepped forward, placing herself between her brother and the bed, though Mira reached out and caught her mother's sleeve, her small fingers curling into the fabric. "Kellen, please," Alira said. "Not here. Not in front of her." "She should hear this," Kellen said, though his eyes flicked to his niece for just a moment, something like pain crossing his sharp features before hardening again. "She should know that her mother brought a soldier from the war that killed her aunt into this hospital, into this district, without so much as a word to her own family." "He is not a soldier," Alira said. "He is the man who saved Rurik, the man Mira has wanted to meet for years." "I know who he is," Kellen said, his golden eyes finally settling fully on me, cold and unreadable. "I read the same records you did, sister. I know the story of Kestrel Station, but knowing that one human pulled one of ours from a fire does not erase what the rest of them did. It does not bring back Sael. It does not undo a single day of that war." "No one is asking you to forget," I said, keeping my voice as level as I could manage. "I'm not here to erase anything. I'm here because your niece asked to meet me, and I said yes." "You should not have been permitted to say yes," Kellen said. "This visit was approved by a council that did not consult the family it affects most directly. I am filing a formal objection. I intend to have this permit revoked before the hour is finished." Mira's small voice cut through the tension like a thin blade. "Uncle Kellen, please don't." Everyone in the room turned toward the bed. Mira had pushed herself up slightly against her pillows, her breathing labored, but her eyes fierce, with a determination that seemed far too large for her small, fading body. "I know Aunt Sale died," she said. "I know it wasn't fair. I think about it too, sometimes, when I can't sleep. But this isn't about the war. This is about me. I asked for this. Mama didn't force me. I asked, because Papa's story was the only thing that made me feel less scared, every time the healers came in with bad news, and I wanted to know it was true before there isn't time left to know anything at all." Her voice cracked on the last words, and Alira moved to her side immediately, smoothing a hand over her daughter's forehead, murmuring something low and soft in their own language that needed no translation to understand. Kellen stood very still, his jaw tight, his golden eyes moving between his niece's exhausted face and my own steady gaze, and for a long moment nobody in the room spoke at all. "I will not revoke the permit today," he said finally, his voice rough. "But I want it understood that I do not forgive this. I do not forgive him, and I do not forgive the war that made this necessary. I am allowing this for her sake, not for his, and not for yours, sister." "That is enough," Alira said quietly. "Thank you, Kellen." He turned to leave, but paused at the doorway, looking back at me one final time. "There is something you should know, human, before you decide this visit has been a kindness to my family." "What's that?" "The fading breath is not simply a Vesson illness," Kellen said. It has appeared before in patients who survived severe smoke exposure early in life, even years before symptoms begin. Our healers have suspected for some time that Mira's condition may trace back to complications from the very fire that nearly killed her father, passed to her through injuries he carried into her mother's pregnancy years later. If that theory is correct, then in some strange and terrible way, the fire that made you her father's rescuer may also be the fire that is now killing his daughter. The room went silent, the weight of that revelation settling over all of us like a physical thing. Is there anything that can be done? I asked, my voice barely steady. If that's the cause, is there a treatment that follows from knowing it? Kellen's expression did not soften, but something in his eyes flickered, the smallest crack in his anger. There is a human medical treatment, he said. Developed in the years since the war, designed for smoke-related lung damage in soldiers who survived station fires similar to the one at Kestrel. Our healers have been trying for weeks to acquire it through diplomatic channels, but human medical exports to Vessan territory remain restricted under the current treaty terms. The request has been delayed in review for over a month. I felt something shift inside me, a cold, clear determination replacing the grief that had been building since I walked into this room. Then we don't wait for the review, I said. We find another way, because if there's a chance, any chance, that something exists to save her, I am not leaving this world until we've tried everything to get it here in time. I stepped out into the hallway and pulled up the small communicator I had brought from home, the same one I had used for years to stay in contact with people from my old rescue unit, most of whom had scattered across human territory once the war ended. I did not know if any of them still had the connections I needed. I did not know if this would work at all. But I was not going to sit in that room and watch a child run out of time while a piece of paperwork sat unsigned somewhere on a desk. The first call went to a woman named Grace Bellamy, who had served as my unit's medical liaison during the war and had gone on to work for the human government's Frontier Relations Office once the fighting stopped. Her voice, when it answered, was thick with sleep, since it was still deep night back on the outpost we had left 3 days ago. "Daniel, do you have any idea what time it is?" "I need a favor," I said. "A big one, and I need it fast." I explained everything, quickly. The fire, the rescue, Mira, the fading breath, the treatment sitting locked behind a month-long review process while a child's time ran out. Grace was quiet for a long moment after I finished, and when she spoke again, all the sleep had gone out of her voice. "You're asking me to push a medical export through emergency channels into Vessan territory," she said. "That's not a small favor, Daniel. That requires sign-off from at least 3 different offices, and most of the people who could authorize it are going to want proof this isn't some kind of trick." "I have proof," I said. "I'm standing in the hospital right now. I can send you everything. Medical records, the council's own findings about the cause of her condition, all of it. I just need someone on your end willing to move fast instead of by the book." Another pause. "Then, give me 2 hours. I'm not promising anything, but give me 2 hours." I spent those 2 hours back at Mira's bedside, where Illyra had managed to convince Kellen to leave without further conflict, though his warning about the fading breath's cause still hung heavy in the room. Mira had grown quieter since he left, her breathing more labored, and the nurse who checked on her twice during that stretch of time wore an expression that told me, without needing to translate anything, that we were running out of margin. "Tell me more about the fire," Mira said at one point, her voice barely above a whisper now. "Not the ending, the middle. What did it look like when you were carrying him?" I told her. I described the way the emergency lights had painted everything red and orange, the way smoke had curled along the ceiling like something alive, the sound of metal groaning under stress somewhere deep in the station's frame. I did not soften it, because I had learned by now that this child did not want softened stories. She wanted true ones, even the frightening parts, because true things were the only kind that mattered when time was this short. Grace's call came back just under 2 hours later, and I stepped into the hallway again to take it, my heart climbing into my throat before she even said a word. "I got it," she said. It wasn't easy, and I burned about a decade of favors doing it, but I got emergency clearance for a single medical shipment under humanitarian exception. The treatment is being pulled from stock at the nearest Frontier Medical Depot right now. It's called pulmonary regeneration therapy, developed for smoke-damaged lung tissue in veterans. If her condition really traces back to prenatal exposure the way your council member described, it should be able to help. I can't promise a cure, Daniel. I can only tell you it's the best chance available. How fast can it get here? Fastest transport I could arrange puts it in Vesen orbit in about 14 hours, Grace said. That's if everything goes right. Customs, transfer authorization, the whole path is going to be tight. 14 hours. I did the math against the labored sound of Mira's breathing I had just left behind in that room, and I did not like how close those two numbers felt to each other. Send it, I said. I'll handle things on this end. The next 14 hours were the longest of my life, and I had lived through a burning space station. I brought the news to Alira and the medical staff, and word moved quickly through the district that a human shipment carrying emergency treatment was inbound under humanitarian exception. Not everyone received that news kindly. A small crowd gathered outside the medical building within hours, some curious, some openly hostile, murmurs of old grief and older anger rippling through people who saw only a human ship approaching their world, without yet understanding what it carried. Kellen returned partway through that long wait, drawn by the same rumors that had drawn the crowd outside, and I braced myself for another confrontation. Instead, he stood in the doorway of Mira's room for a long moment, watching his niece's labored breathing, watching his sister's exhausted face, and something in his posture seemed to loosen, just slightly, like a held breath finally beginning to release. "You did this," he said to me, not quite a question, not quite an accusation either. "I made a call to an old friend," I said. The rest was other people deciding to move fast when they didn't have to. "Humans, moving fast to help Vesen," Kellen said, something bitter and tired in his voice. "That is not the story I grew up believing." "Maybe it's time for a new story," I said. "Doesn't erase the old one, doesn't undo what happened to your sister. But maybe there's room for both to be true." He did not answer that, but he did not leave the doorway either, and for the rest of that long, aching wait, Illyra's brother stayed in the room with the rest of us, watching over his niece with an expression I could not quite name. The shipment arrived with 2 hours to spare, though it did not feel like spare time when the medical transport finally touched down at the district landing pad, and I watched the case containing the treatment carried through the halls under armed Vesen escort, moving with an urgency that matched the pounding of my own heart. The lead healer, an older Vesen woman with steady hands and calm eyes, reviewed the treatment's documentation for what felt like an eternity before finally nodding and beginning preparations to administer it. "This will not work instantly," she warned us, her translated voice careful and measured. "Lung tissue regeneration is a slow process, even under the best circumstances. We will not know for certain if it is working for several days. But her vital signs, if they stabilize even slightly in the first few hours, will tell us whether we are on the right path." Mira, weak as she was, managed a small smile at that. "A few days," she murmured. "I can do a few days. I've done worse than a few days." The treatment began that evening, administered slowly through a thin line connected to her arm, and the room fell into a different kind of waiting than the frantic hours before. Quieter now, heavier, with a fragile hope that none of us wanted to speak aloud in case saying it broke whatever small chance we had built. I stayed through that first night, sitting in the chair beside her bed, while Illyra rested for the first time in what looked like days, her exhaustion finally catching up with her now that there was something other than desperation to hold on to. Mira drifted in and out of sleep, and each time she woke, she found me still there, and each time a small, tired smile crossed her face, like she was reassuring herself the story had not ended. "Tell me something," she whispered once, deep in the night, her voice thin but steadier than it had been hours earlier. "Do you think Papa knows? That you came?" I did not have an answer built on anything but hope, but I gave it to her anyway, because some things deserve to be answered with hope rather than certainty. I think he does, I said. I think somewhere he's glad the story turned out to be true. By the third morning, her breathing had grown steadier, the labored catch in each breath softening into something closer to normal, and the healer who checked on her that morning allowed herself, for the first time since we had arrived, a small and genuine smile. Her lung capacity has improved measurably since the treatment began, she said. It is early. I will not promise this is a cure, but it is the clearest sign of improvement we have seen since her diagnosis, and that alone is worth calling remarkable. Elira wept then, openly, the dim glow of her skin brightening steadily with each passing moment, and even Kellen, standing near the window with his arms crossed, allowed something that looked almost like relief to cross his sharp features. I stayed on Threnna for 6 more days after that, well past the 48 hours the council had originally granted, because word of what had happened had spread through the capital district, and the same council that had reluctantly approved a temporary visit found itself, under growing public attention, extending my permit without needing to be asked twice. The story of the human who returned to keep an old promise, and the shipment that followed him, moved through the city faster than any treaty negotiation ever had. On my last day before returning home, Mira was sitting up in bed on her own, still weak, still recovering, but breathing easier than she had in months, drawing on a data slate with the same focus her mother had once described, sketching what looked like a rough diagram of a ship engine. "What's that?" I asked, nodding at the slate. "A faster rescue ship," she said, not looking up from her work. "I told you, I'm still going to build it. Now I actually get the chance to." I laughed, and the sound surprised me with how light it felt. After everything. "When you build it," I said, "I want the first ride." "Deal," she said, and held out her small hand, and I shook it like we were sealing something far larger than a simple promise between a soldier and a child. Elira walked me to the transport that would carry me back toward human space, and at the base of the boarding ramp, she turned to face me with an expression I had not seen from her since the night she first knocked on my door. "I did not know, when I came to find you, that this is where it would lead," she said. "I only knew my daughter had one wish left, and I could not bear to let her die without it. I did not imagine that wish would become the reason she gets to keep living." "I didn't do this alone," I said. "You did the hardest part. You crossed a war you were never sure had really ended, just to ask a stranger for help. And you said yes," she said, "when every reasonable instinct should have told you to say no." "Some things are worth being unreasonable for," I said. She reached out and took my hand, the same gesture from that first night in my kitchen, except this time there was no desperation in it, only something warm and steady and grateful. "Thank you, Daniel Cole," she said, "for a fire 9 years ago that you never learned the ending of, and for choosing, when I asked, to finally learn it." I boarded the transport, and as it lifted off the landing pad and Threnna's amber oceans and violet sky fell away beneath the viewport, I found myself thinking not about the war that had once tried to convince me these people were my enemy, and not about the checkpoints and council chambers that had nearly stopped me from reaching that small bright hospital room. I thought instead about a girl drawing star charts and dreaming of faster ships, about a story that had traveled across 9 years and countless light years to prove itself true, and about how the smallest choice made in the middle of a burning corridor, made without any thought of reward or recognition, had somehow found its way back to me, wearing the shape of a promise I never knew I had made and never regretted keeping. The treaty between our two peoples did not change overnight because of one dying child and one old rescue. Wars leave wounds too deep for a single act of kindness to heal completely, and there were still families on both sides who carried grief that no story, however true, could undo. But in the months that followed, the humanitarian medical exception that had saved Mira's life became the first of several new agreements between our governments, small doors opening where only walls had stood before, built not on treaties written by distant officials, but on the simple, stubborn proof that a promise made in fire could still mean something years later, across the widest distance the stars could offer. And somewhere on a world with amber oceans and a violet sky, a girl who was once given only days to live grew stronger with each passing season, filling data slate after data slate with drawings of the ship she still meant to build, the fastest rescue ship in the galaxy, so that no story like hers would ever again begin with someone waiting 4 long hours for a hero to arrive.